Good evening. Welcome to the City of Lebanon Plan Commission meeting, Monday, March 19th, 2018. Before we get started, tonight, I'd like to, in lieu of recent incidents that have happened to our city, Deputy Pickett, Councilman Lamar, and a young Boone County resident, Sidney Foster, I'd like to take a moment of silence. Thank you. Kelly, would you call the roll?
Matt Reynolds.
Here.
John Lassley.
Here.
Kevin Krulik.
Here.
Keith Campbell.
Here.
Jeremy Lawler.
Here.
Gordon Perry.
Here.
Brian Tandy.
Here.
Jane Taylor. Absent. Lori Gross. Here.
All right. Next item is the approval of the minutes from last month's meeting. Has everyone had a chance to read them, look through them? Questions, comments, revisions? If not,
Move we adopt the minutes from the February 20th, 2018 meeting.
okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. On to the next item, old business, docket number 18-4. Ben, you want to lead us through this, please?
Sure. This is a preliminary plan review for Gradison land development for the Sunbrook subdivision. This is, I'll go ahead and pull up some information here in a second, but this is the residential neighborhood that's on about 454 acres, the northwest part of town, bordered by Witt Road and 250 North. And let me get my information up so everybody can. First, I will walk through the process for the approval and then walk through some of the highlights of the neighborhood, and then I'll let them kind of fill in the gaps where I missed, and then let you guys ask some questions. So this is going to be a little challenging to see on the big screen, but I'll zoom in where necessary. So just to refresh everyone's memory, in terms of the process, this is a plan unit development process. What was before you last month in terms of this project was the PUD rezone and ordinance. That ordinance established the development standards for the neighborhood. That ordinance was forwarded to the council with a favorable recommendation from this body, and that ordinance was adopted at the last council meeting. So the PUD ordinance and rezone has been adopted. The second step now in the process is this preliminary plan approval, and this is an approval that is a plan commission approval. This doesn't go to council. So in this case, you're looking to confirm that they have met the standards established in their PUD ordinance and any other standards of the ordinance, and then looking at any specific design elements to make sure we're getting exactly what we expect out of the development and we're meeting all conditions that were placed. An additional item that we also looked at these is where the preliminary plan could not address specific items such as off-site improvements, additional landscape standards that we looked at with the developer. We put those in a statement of commitments that was attached also. So tonight you would be looking to approve both that preliminary plan and also the statement of commitments that would need to be then executed by the applicant. So just to kind of walk through kind of a high-level overview of the project, let me pull out my staff report here and walk through some of those highlights for you. This is, again, a 208-lot single-family residential development bordered by Witt and 250. It's an interesting parcel that we've already reviewed in that it doesn't have much road frontage on either of those roads. There's a couple of small areas on Witt where they do have frontage onto Witt Road. and then a narrow, about 74-foot wide strip of property where that has access to 250 North, where you see this secondary entrance. So it is unique in that it has residential homes around its border on both the north and west and south sides, and then it's bordered by the railroad to the east. So what you're seeing here is the preliminary plan. Everything in green is shown as common area and or easements related to regulated drains. What you see in the light tan color is the lots, which we have reviewed and confirmed that they all meet the requirements of their PUD ordinance. This dark brown, almost black area on the screen is a playground or active recreational area. And let me pull up, they have some examples of what they'd be looking to do in that area. This is just a quick photo of something that they had determined would be something like what they'd put in this area, nice playground equipment, something that's relatively low maintenance. Or this is also another example, so they had suggested that one or two of these would be something like what they look like for this active recreational space. Okay, going back to the overall plan then, you'll see then that there is their main detention area that is next to that active recreational space. They are still working their way through drainage review, and we'll need to get approval for that, but they are working their way through that process. As you go further to the south, again, you see where there's a larger common area here to the southeast of the development, and we had some conversations last month about that this would be kind of a nature preserve type area with a walking path through it. And again, they've got some examples, and I think they showed some examples last time, but just to give you an idea of the type of thing they're talking about, this shows where they'd have some taller native grasses and plants and flowers and things like that with a grass walking path through that way. So just something that would provide an additional passive recreational amenity to that neighborhood. Right, that kind of gives you a really broad overview of the overall development. I'll walk through some of those additional specifics. This has gone through TAC a couple of different times, and you'll see those comments in the staff report. Sewer and Water did provide some comments on the specific infrastructure requirements. They have reviewed all of the utility easement widths and layouts and find those acceptable. From our electrical division, our electric utility does design the electric service, and they provided some additional requirements to them in terms of what would be required for conduit, making sure that they require access for both also the communications. And then they also have some additional information about three-phase line along the railroad track. In terms of stormwater, they have provided their stormwater calculations designed to carry daily from Christopher Burke to review, and he is in process of reviewing that now. Fire department, just to go through one additional item that we discussed as part of this development. They did ask for and receive as part of their PUD ordinance of basically essentially a variance from our standard for right-of-way width and street width. So rather than being a 60-foot right-of-way width, they have asked for a reduction to 50 foot. And then the street width, we require in our standards a 34-foot back of curb to back of curb street width. And this here shows a 30-foot back of curb to back of curb. Our standards allow parking on both sides of the road at that 34-foot back of curb. And the fire department was concerned about making sure they had a 20-foot clear for their equipment to get through those roads. So we worked on and the applicant committed that they would put up no parking signs on one side of each street to make sure we maintain that 20-foot clear for fire department and also maintains a free flow two-way traffic. So there on each one of these streets, while they have been reduced the width by 4 feet, they will only allow parking on one side, which is actually probably a better scenario than 34 feet with parking on both sides. You have a better two-way traffic. So they have committed to that. In terms of the City of Lebanon engineer, and I'll get into this when I get into the commitments, but we did ask them to complete a full traffic impact study for the development to look at the impacts to both Witt Road and 250, and then also the intersection of Witt and 250. And what we determined then, as part of that traffic impact study, was that the existing conditions plus the added traffic that would be generated by this development required a handful of improvements to the two new intersections that were created on Witt and 250 with the development. On the Witt Road frontage, their entrance was Sun Chaser. It asked for or recommended that there would be one inbound lane and 2 outbound lanes on Sun Chaser, so that it would be basically a 3-lane entrance Sun Chaser, so that you have a right and left turn dedicated outbound lanes out of the neighborhood from Sun Chaser onto Witt Road, so you help to alleviate some of the stacking that may happen in the neighborhood as they're leaving. And then also make sure that there's stop control on Sun Chaser, which seems obvious, but it's a recommendation. And then on their entrance on 250 North with Point Drive, there was some additional recommendations. It did recommend, based on the existing westbound traffic on 250 North, that the additional counts of traffic that be turning into the neighborhood, it did recommend a passing blister for the westbound lane on the north side of 250 North. And in addition to the 3-lane entrance exit and from Point Drive onto 250 North. So just one additional requirement for that passing blister based on the amount of traffic coming from essentially Lebanon Street, the commercial area coming this direction. It did recommend a passing blister. So when I get to the commitments, we did write some commitments that are requiring the applicant to acquire sufficient right-of-way for that passing blister and then install passing blister per the standards that they would agree to with the city engineer. So those are all written into those commitments to begin to make sure that we continue to maintain the level of service on these roads that are recommended, either level of service A or B, and those service levels will be maintained. One additional item that did come up in discussions, I believe it was actually at the council meeting last week, is the homeowners on either side of this northern entrance, both on the east and west sides, were concerned about the proximity to their properties. It is pretty tight through there. Like I said, it's only 74 feet. So what we have worked out with the applicant was that we would require them to do that 3-lane entrance exit, 1 inbound, 2 outbound. We suggested that they could do a sidewalk only on one side, so we make sure we do have access out to 250 North. And then that leaves about 10 feet on either side of that improvement for them to do some light mounding, and then also some landscape treatments in order to screen from those properties. And they did provide an example of what they would envision for this entryway landscaping. They likely wouldn't get a mound quite this tall because that's more like a 3 to 4 foot mound. There's not quite the distance at a 3 to 1 slope to get that tall. You're probably looking more like a 1 to 2 undulating mound, 1 to 2 foot undulating mound with just a variety of landscaping. So they would do a variety of both deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs on that mound in order to provide some additional both entryway treatment, then also some screening for those homeowners that are directly adjacent to that roadway. Okay. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. So one other item that did come up with this neighborhood at the last Plan Commission meeting, there was significant discussion about buffers adjacent to existing residential uses around. And I did just want to point out our ordinance or UDO requirements in terms of buffers. This, in this case, is a residential to residential transition. Our ordinance does not require buffers or landscape treatments or fencing or anything like that where it's a similar adjacent land use. The only time where our ordinance would address the additional requirements for landscaping is when you're residential to commercial retail or residential to industrial. So in this case, because it's residential to residential, there aren't any specific UDO requirements for additional buffers. Just want to make sure I pointed that out from the UDO perspective on landscape buffers. They have in some cases put buffers where there was immediate impact to the neighbors, but in terms of overall, our UDO does not necessarily require it where it's an existing similar land use next door. So just walking through then the staff recommendation, we find that this plan as presented is in compliance with the Unified Development Ordinance requirements and also with the requirements of their PUD ordinance and the development standards established in that ordinance. Staff would recommend approval of the preliminary plan contingent on the following conditions. Number one, the TAC comments that the applicant adequately address any remaining City of Lebanon TAC comments prior to submission of a secondary plat. And two, the applicant receive formal drainage approval from the City of Lebanon Board of Public Works prior to submission of a secondary plat. And three, and I will go through these after I read the recommendation, written commitments that the applicant executes the draft statement of commitments and provides executed copy for recording with the Office of the Recorder of Boone County. And I will walk through those commitments, and we kind of hinted on them already. So there's 6 commitments. The first one is that the applicant would dedicate right-of-way on Witt Road and County Road 250 North in compliance with the City of Lebanon thoroughfare plan, where the property is adjacent to those thoroughfares. And I believe that would be 60 feet on Witt Road and 40 feet on 250 North. And the second is related to that traffic impact study that the owner would provide the following off-site improvements to County Road 250 North in compliance with the Lebanon Thoroughfare Plan and the A&F Engineering Traffic Impact Study. Item A, owner would be required to acquire right-of-way according to the Lebanon Thoroughfare Plan along the north side of County Road 250 North across from the proposed entrance to the subdivision at Point Drive for a length of 500 feet to accommodate the passing blister recommended in the traffic impact study. And the owner will coordinate with city engineer to determine the specific location for this acquisition. Westbound travel lane on 250 North would be widened to a minimum through width lane of 12 feet from the current center line for the length of that 500 foot acquisition. Again, to make sure we've got a through lane that meets our minimum standard. And then also to install a 500 foot long, 12 foot wide passing blister to the requirements established in this commitment. All designs, again, must be reviewed by the city engineer. And then the final item is related to that acquisition that the owner would demonstrate good faith efforts in providing for the above described improvements through the completion of construction documents, engineer's estimate of cost of construction certified by a professional engineer, and right-of-way acquisition. Should the developer not be able to obtain the necessary right-of-way, the applicant would make a payment to the City of Lebanon and the amount of the engineer's estimate of the cost of construction. They will make that payment to the clerk treasurer. In essence, they will pay for all the capital costs associated with those improvements, minus the right-of-way acquisition, and then it will be responsibility of the city then to go out and acquire the right-of-way through a regular process and make those improvements. And then it also does mention the requirements for the 3-lane entrance exits onto Point Drive and Sunchaser, and then also the requirement for mounds and landscaping along Point Drive where they're adjacent to those 2 residential homes at the north end of the neighborhood. And that is a quick rundown of those requirements. So I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have now, and the applicant can also fill in the gaps for where I may have missed something.
Ben, I do have some questions on
Sure.
the traffic study.
Yes.
The passing blister on the north side of 250, having looked at that area the other day, kind of walked it and looked at it, who's responsible? I know the developer will purchase the right-of-way or will attempt to. There is existing utilities immediately in that area, gas lines, utility poles. Is that something that the applicant would also be responsible for the relocation of?
I would probably defer to the city engineer on that. We haven't actually gone out and done any survey work out there yet to determine exactly what's there, but.
And then the other issue with that passing blister is the church entrance is immediately across the way.
Yeah.
They have some landscaping that I want to say is within 8 to 10 feet of the road that I think would be affected by adding that passing blister, or at least a big enough one.
There's a couple of elements to that. The church's property that will be impacted by that passing blister. The most important one is their entrance right there, because it is offset from where this entrance would be to the neighborhood, which I have, and I'm sure the city engineer has concerns about that, having the offset entrances or exits right there. So we're gonna have to take a look at that with a little bit of broader perspective and figure out whether we try to realign that so it's roughly aligned with the entrance to the neighborhood to make sure we don't have that offset, and then take a look at how that passing blister impacts that. But you're right, there are definitely gonna be some things we have to look at beyond just the installation of the passing blister.
And then you may get into it a little bit more with the traffic study. I know we did look at the impact of Witt Road and 250 there at the intersection and the Sunchaser and Point Drive. Was any consideration given to the impact of 250 and State Road 39 and Witt Road and Lafayette Avenue? I think those two could see substantial.
We didn't. When we discovered that there were going to be no impacts to Witt and 250, that's the first intersection that they would get to from either one of those entrances to the neighborhoods. When that intersection remained at a level of service A and at worst B at high points times. So you don't, until you get to a level of service of D, you don't consider improvements. So with that intersection close to the neighborhood not being impacted hardly at all or negligible, it can determine that by the time you get to those other intersections that the impact would even be lessened because they'd be scattered. The traffic would be scattered a little bit more by the time you get there. We can certainly take a look at that, but with the impacts being negligible right by the neighborhood, we did not go that far out.
Okay. I think currently, we're at, and I don't have the statistics back it up, but Witt Road and Lafayette Avenue, I think that intersection tends to back up with cars attempting to go south on Lafayette. And I think with the increase from the neighborhood heading that way. And then I know maybe, obviously the state is going to have to get involved in dot with 39.
Sure.
If we're going to add turn lights, because I think, again, that's where you have a lot of traffic coming east on 250, crossing over 39 or turning, the traffic coming west on 250 to get on 39. I've sat at that light a few times myself. And,
Sure.
so I was just concerned that we didn't look at the impact of those. I understand the immediate impact around the neighborhood, but I think we may want to look at expanding that.
We're already, and Kevin can fill in the gaps a little bit, we're already looking at that Witt and Lafayette intersection just from a broader perspective, because the other neighborhood that you're reviewing tonight is also going to have some impacts there, to figure out whether there's alternatives at that intersection that make sense. Is there additional stop control there? What does that do to the free flow traffic on Lafayette Avenue? Are you causing backups on Lafayette to allow people to turn from Witt Road? So yeah, we are looking at that intersection already from a broader perspective to figure out, is there an existing concern, and is it going to be heightened with some additional traffic out there, and what are our options to correct that?
Great. Thank you.
I'll just add on to it, and Ben did an excellent job of explaining everything, but yeah, I would echo that. You know, the geometry of the intersection of Witt and 250 is really the most restrictive intersection in that area, and so we were pleasantly surprised with the traffic impact study, which we trust and we value the opinion of that engineer, didn't show any impacts, and the effects are almost negligible. Obviously, State Road 39 and 250 is an NDOT intersection that we have little control over. But I would also say is, you know, that intersection is equipped with some turn lanes, again, much larger capacity for traffic in that area. Over to Lafayette Avenue, I wouldn't doubt you that some traffic might back up waiting to turn left onto Lafayette Avenue. In fact, when I first moved to town, we lived off of Witt Road, so I've sat in those. I would say, generally speaking, although it might feel like a long time when you're sitting in your car, if you were actually to time it, it's probably less than a minute. And again, I wouldn't consider that as a level of service that would rise to a C or below, where you might want to consider impacts. Probably the biggest benefit of Lafayette Avenue and Witt Road is that there is very little traffic actually coming off the interstate. There's only about 700 cars a day in either direction up there. We've recently tested that. So there's not, again, probably not a lot there that would warrant it. And I would also point out, in the future, that interchange may not be there. So the traffic situation would even.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Ben, I had a question.
Sir.
Did I hear you correctly, or did I actually read correctly where the whole addition is going to be basically only parking on one side? Is that?
That's correct. All of the public streets in the neighborhood will be parking on one side of the street only. It'll need to be signed as no parking on the side where parking is not permitted.
I guess I have some more questions about that myself, Ben. The reduction in the actual street size from 34. I mean, does that help them meet the minimum lot size? Why is that?
Yeah, as they looked at the layout of the development and the street geometries and I mean, they can probably fill this in a little bit more, but as they looked at that street layout, it did help them to be able to reduce primarily the right-of-way. The street width is part of it, but the reduction of 10 feet on the right-of-way width was the more significant assistance to them. And as we kind of looked at the numbers, you know, with a 30-foot right as opposed to right-of-way, or I'm sorry, a 30-foot road width as compared to the 34, that reduction, if you still allowed parking on both sides, would cause some restrictions that we don't want to see. That's why we took a look at whether it would make some sense just to allow parking on only one side, because by doing that, you know, your typical parallel parking space is 8 feet wide, so you still have 22 feet for two-way traffic on that road. With cars parked on one side, which is sufficient for the fire department and sufficient for a residential street for two-way traffic.
At least on the preliminary plan that you showed, they were talking about these 3-lane entrances onto Witt and to 250. Maybe it's just me, but those look the same size as all the other roads there. So where are we coming up with that extra space?
You're correct. So it's not that The line you see on there is actually the right-of-way width as opposed to the width of
Okay.
the street.
Yep.
So within that, in most cases, there is a road and 2 sidewalks with planting strips in that width that you see on the plan. So it does not currently reflect there being a 3-lane entrance exit, which is why I put it in the written commitments, detailing out exactly how that would need to be designed, so that it could be added when they did the secondary plat.
Okay, when you make mention of the secondary plat, is that the final plat or not the final plat?
They would do it by section, but that would be the plat that's recorded that then would allow them to begin developing property.
Okay. Other questions for Ben?
Yeah, you say there will only be parking on one side. Is there a requirement that says that the mailboxes are on one side and no parking is on the other?
I believe
They're
that
on
may
the
be,
same side, if
I
you will.
believe that may be in their covenants, actually,
Is
that
it?
the mailbox location.
Hi, Adam Mears with Gradison Land Development. We did talk with Ben about the mailboxes, and one of the things we discussed was doing some type of cluster mailbox, rather than every house having an individual mailbox, having clusters of maybe 3 or 4, and likely they would be, I think, preferable to be on one side of the street. I think from a visual standpoint, it looked better to have them kind of be together on one side of the street. So yes, that would be our intent.
I guess it would make sense to have the no parking on that side to
Sure.
help out the U.S. Post Office.
Yep. And we'll work, part of the plan, we're going to have to work with the post office on the cluster boxes and make sure they're comfortable with those, and certainly going through the next secondary plat process to make sure that our plan for the first, we won't get up, just so you know, our second section is going to be up off of 250, so we won't really be dealing with that entrance, the 3-way turn, until our second section of secondary plat. First section is going to be down off of Witt Road, but certainly we'll work with Ben and make sure that, and I think be back through here with those final plans, so you'll see each section and the construction docs related to that. I'd be happy to answer any more questions if anybody has any for us.
I'll defer back to Ben for a second. Thank you.
Sure.
We talked about the playground area and these other kind of green areas and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those will be the responsibility, especially the playground area, that will be the responsibility of the HOA and not the city of Lebanon, correct?
That is correct.
And the maintenance on the green areas, green space?
All Homeowners Association.
And does that include the retention pond also?
Yes, it does.
And then I guess what happens if the Homeowners Association goes belly up in about 10 years or less? What happens then?
That's an excellent question. If that happens 20 years from now, I don't know.
Because we've had that problem before.
I can tell you that the Homeowners Association will be managed by the developer while the project is under construction.
We've never had trouble that way.
But the covenants require a HOA to maintain the areas, so.
Is that somewhere that developer run or developer assisted HOA, that's somewhere in the covenant?
Yes, it's in the
Until it's fully
covenants.
developed, until they're done and everything is sold, right?
Yes.
I think it was 80%.
Yeah, there's a percentage in there, but yeah, they would hand it over to the homeowners at a certain percentage to build out.
Okay. All right. You're the applicant?
I'd just like to add briefly about the Homeowner Association. We will, when we say it'll be developer managed, actually we use a professional management company that manages our HOA, so we're certainly involved from architectural approvals, certainly funding the HOA in the early stages, but the management actually of the association is done by a professional company. They'll have somebody on site, they run through, they look at things to make sure there's no violations, They're in charge of collecting the dues and all those things. And Commissioner Campbell, regarding, I know we discussed at the last Plan Commission, and a couple times we've discussed HOA longevity. Certainly we do our best, in our budgeting to budget for reserves, to make sure that the HOA is sustainable. And we do our best to do that. I don't believe, at least in our experience, we've seen an HOA that's fizzled, so to speak. But certainly, I suppose if several years from now, 208 homeowners decided we don't want an HOA anymore, I guess they could do that. I can't imagine that a scenario where that would happen, at least. But you said you've experienced it, and I'll tell you, I don't know a way. I can't sit here today and tell you I've got an answer for how to stop 208 people from defaulting or doing those things. I can just tell you we do our best on the front end to set it up in a way that hopefully, well, definitely the homeowners are going to see the value in the management of that aspect, and turn it over to them, financially sound homeowner association that's got dues and budgeting in place, and the management company is really good at doing that as well, helping with that. So we do everything we can to set the HOAs up to succeed when they're turned over to the homeowners, and our experience has been nothing but positive on that level. So
does your management firm stay with them after you leave?
Again, it's up to the homeowners in the end if they want to retain that management firm. Certainly, I think after, let's say it takes us 5 years plus to sell this subdivision out, they're going to know nothing other than having a management company manage them. I think for when you've had something managed for so long, to bring it back in-house and realize the work that is required, I'd be surprised if anybody decided, hey, let's take this task back on to our own. And the fees that the management company charges are kind of negligible compared to the benefit that they get. So I'd be surprised if they may switch companies, maybe they decide to bid it out to other companies, but I'd be surprised if somebody after this many years then decides to take that task on their own. That'd be a tough challenge.
The management company is a separate entity from the development company?
Completely unrelated to us. We hire them, we pay them, they get a fee based upon the amount of homes, et cetera. And the company we work with now manages all of our developments for the most part, other than some out of state. But in the central Indiana area, they manage our developments. They do a great job. We're happy with them. We work with them on a I won't say a daily basis, but on a regular basis, dealing with budgeting and any issues. Somebody wants to put up a fence, those come through us and actually go to Mark, and Mark kind of is in charge of approving all the architectural items in each of the subdivisions. So we take it very seriously.
Other questions for the applicant?
Not necessarily for the applicant. Ben, if that were to happen, as Keith said that, it has in the past, is that something that if the Homeowners Association do go belly up, is that something the city takes on, such as the not mowing and that kind of thing? Is that something that the city steps in and?
So that would kind of fall into a code enforcement issue at that point, maintaining grass and detention ponds, et cetera. So that would still be owned in common, those properties. It would not be city's ownership. So if we end up taking care of them, we would be putting a lien on the property. So we wouldn't, out of the good graces of our heart, start maintaining their common areas.
But that's something that we would be able to do.
Yeah, if it got to the point where we needed to start maintaining them, we would be placing a lien on the property.
Okay.
From experience, I would say that there would be a very difficult challenge ahead of 208 homeowners to come together jointly to get, because the bylaws of the restrictive covenants are going to state the number of homes or the percentages of ownership to release or to dissolve those covenants. It's from personal experience and being an HOA president, it wouldn't happen. All we would do as a city is we'd have to put, if we were to maintain it, I would imagine, is to put a lien onto the property. It would not become city property, not by deed.
It would not, yeah.
Ben's a nice enough guy, he may mow it himself.
I charge way more than contractors though.
All right, other questions for Ben or the applicant? Okay. This being a public hearing, I'd like to open up the public portion of the hearing to those in the audience that have input on this. If you want to come forward and make a comment, we need you to sign in, and then we're going to limit comments to 3 minutes per person. And when you start at the podium, if you give us your name and address, and we'll go from there. Okay, don't everybody rush all at once. Okay, seeing as how there is no public comment, I will close the portion, the public hearing for this docket and turn back to the council and any additional questions.
Ben or Gordon, or maybe even Rob, could you guys explain what we're, after tonight, what are we proposing with a recommendation to the Common Council?
This is actually a plan commission approval. This does not go forward to the council. So that the council is required to adopt the PUD rezone and ordinance, which they did. Okay. This is entirely a plan commission decision on the preliminary plan. So this would be your approval tonight. At this point, then they would move forward with phase one, the phase one secondary plat and construction drawings.
Okay. Thank you. With that, if anybody doesn't have any questions, I'll make a motion to approve docket 18-04 for the Sunbrook development, pending the TAC recommendations as well as the letter of commitment that was provided with the
And the stormwater.
submission.
And the stormwater.
Oh, and the stormwater.
I'll make a second.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly?
Matt Reynolds,
Yes.
John Lashley,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik,
Aye.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Jeremy Lawler,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Okay, passes approval. On to our next item, new business, docket number 18-2, Arbor Investments. Ben?
All right. We're going to replay the same process. We're in the same stage of this development is the one we just heard. So this is the preliminary plan application for the Riley Ridge subdivision. This is 85 or 86 lots. I'm spacing now, but it's somewhere in the 85 lots, I've reminded. This is, again, the preliminary plan, so their PUD ordinance was before this body last month and was forwarded with a favorable recommendation to the council. The council did adopt their PUD rezone and ordinance at the last meeting. So this is back before you now for the preliminary plan review and approval at the Plan Commission. I will get out my notes on this one. All right. Okay. Just as a reminder, this is about a 25-acre infill project. I will scroll to a second so you can see a little bit more detail. But this is about a 25-acre infill project. I will bring up, see if I can find it here. Here we go. So you'll see this is directly adjacent to Interstate 65 to the west. The existing Clear Vista neighborhood is to their east, and then Riley Road is directly south. So this is, again, Clear Vista had a street that was stubbed into this property, so this was always intended to be another phase or another development back in this property. And then the applicant before us tonight is looking to do 85-lot single-family residential development in this property. Let me go. This kind of gives you the overview of the project here. Again, there is a Witt Avenue extension that comes from Clear Vista and then their second entrance is off of Riley Road to the south. You'll see they've got 85 lots on the extension of Danielle Road. Essentially, it's a single road subdivision. They do have 7 lots that are front on Riley Road, in addition to the lots that are internal to the neighborhood. So then kind of walking through, again, very, very similar to what we looked at this last time. This has, on the last project, this has been through TAC. Very similar comments from sewer and water, electric subdivision, or the electric division, other than a copy and paste error on my part that mentions the 3-phase 15-foot easement, which was related to Sunbrook, not Riley Ridge. So no need to be concerned about that. Against Lebanon Stormwater, they are going through stormwater review with Kerry Daly and Christopher Burke. Fire department, this is very similar to the last one. So in this case, the Witt Avenue extension, that was a 60-foot right-of-way, 34-foot back of curb. So they did extend a similar right-of-way and road width to the west to this intersection with Danielle Road. Danielle Road, however, very similar to the last one, they're looking at a 50-foot right-of-way, a 30-foot back of curb. In this case, it was very much because of the shape of the property. As you can see, it's not very deep from east to west, so in order to get appropriate lot sizes on both sides of the road and still have enough room for detention, it became very that extra 10 feet became very beneficial. So again, very similar scenario. We looked at this with the fire department, and they said as long as we've got 20-foot clear, we're okay. So again, we're going to limit parking to one side of the street in this neighborhood, similar to the last one. Walking through some other elements, the main item from TAC that we worked with the applicant on for probably about the last 3 or 4 weeks was related to Riley Road. Essentially, Riley Road at the intersection with Danielle Road on the south of this property to the east to Sam Rawson is an old county road. There's no right-of-way. It doesn't meet our standards as far as pavement width. There's no sidewalks. There's no storm drainage. So in looking at this with the developer, we know that there's going to need to be some improvements to Riley Road, and part of that is due to the 85 lots that they will be developing in this neighborhood. They are not the entire reason that Riley Road needs to be improved, because there are other developments out there. So we did in looking this with them is that we essentially did a cost share with the developer. They would in essence pay for a percentage of that total cost. They did bear the cost of the survey and doing the engineer's estimate of cost of construction. And that preliminary estimate is that the capital cost to improve Riley Road, and that would include new pavement, curb and gutter, storm sewer, and sidewalk on one side, that total cost is approximately $400,000. And that does not include right-of-way acquisition. So in working with them to come up with an amicable terms, we determined that their portion of that, in addition to the money they've already spent on that survey work and preliminary layout and cost and engineer's estimate, was that they would contribute $75,000 to that cost, and they would make that payment at the time of secondary plat to the city, and we would place it in escrow until such time that the city goes out and acquires right-of-way and makes that improvement, which we would not intend to make until the neighborhood is mostly, if not completely, built out, because this is going to be their primary construction entrance. So it is going to take a beating, I guess is a good way to put it, with all the construction. So we're not going to consider that work until they're closer to being complete. I would say at least 90% complete in that neighborhood. Will we start considering that, and that'll give us some time to figure out the pots of money we need to come up with to make those improvements. And that commitment is in the statement of commitments that we would ask you to consider as part of their preliminary plan tonight, the elements associated with that cost share with the applicant. In terms of other specifics, again, because this is an infill site, there's not a whole lot of room to do a lot other than provide lots and detention. So you can see that Danielle Road is essentially a double loaded street all the way up and down. Their detention is to the west of the lots. There are 2 detention areas, and then there is a 3rd wet pond that's in this common area here. There was a number of questions about landscaping last time, and I can pull up the landscape plan, but essentially you'll see the standard lot commitment of trees and shrubs on the lots, and then street trees, and then there's a significant buffer that they would plant along the interstate to provide a barrier, double row of evergreen trees to provide both a visual and sound barrier from the interstate. Make sure I'm not missing anything. The other item that came up was that there are some stands of trees that are essentially between this neighborhood and Clear Vista. There's some mature trees. And what the applicant has done is not only they're committing to essentially preserving any trees that are healthy, that make some sense to keep, and they're placing them in a tree preservation area. It's essentially a recorded easement that would limit the improvements that could be made in that area. So it essentially would preserve that existing tree line to the backs of these properties. These homeowners wouldn't be permitted to put fences, et cetera, in that area. It is a tree preservation area. So that does make sure to preserve those items. There were a couple of items that came up at the last Plan Commission meeting, specific scenarios adjacent to Common Area 2 with the homeowners here concerned about there being a pond in that location. And then also at the very south end, and I'll let the applicant just fill in, they've had some discussion with those property owners and come up to agreement on Common Area 2. Adjacent to this, I guess, northeastern property line, they will be installing a 6-foot wood privacy fence, and it's my understanding, while it didn't make it into the plans, but they've come up to a similar agreement with the neighbor to the south along this eastern property line.
They have? I just want to make sure I heard you right. They have?
They have come to an agreement, and they have already placed on the plans the 6-foot wood privacy fence on this Common Area 2. The other discussions with the property owner to the south happened a little bit later in the process, so it didn't make it into the plans, but they have committed to installing a wood privacy fence there. That was not on a requirement of staff, but they did choose to meet with those property owners individually and come up in agreement with them. So they have committed to those items. Going through the staff recommendation, very similar to the last one. A review of the submitted preliminary plan is presented. Staff finds compliance with the Unified Development Ordinance and the PUD ordinance that was adopted by the council at their last meeting. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plan subject to the following conditions. Again, number 1, TAC comments, that the applicant adequately address any remaining City of Lebanon TAC comments prior to submission of a secondary plat. Number 2, that the applicant receive formal drainage approval from the City of Lebanon Board of Public Works prior to submission of a secondary plat. And number 3, and I'll walk through these also, the written commitments, that the applicant executes the draft statement of commitments and provides executed copy for recording with the Office of the Recorder of Boone County. Statement of commitments was attached to your packet. Item number 1, that the owner would dedicate right-of-way to the City of Lebanon on Riley Road at the south end of the property adjacent to said thoroughfare to match the existing 25-foot half right-of-way that exists to the west. And number 2, that the owner would financially participate in the improvement and widening of Riley Road, beginning at Danielle Road to the west, terminating at Sam Ralston Road to the east. Owner's participation will include the following. Owner would be required to complete an engineer's estimate of cost of construction for the project. The scope of the project includes widening of Riley Road to 24 feet of total asphalt pavement with 2-foot curb and gutter on either side, drainage accommodations, driveway replacements as necessary, and a 6-foot concrete sidewalk along the north side of Riley Road. In addition to the widening, the existing asphalt pavement should be milled and surfaced to a depth of 2 inches. And as I mentioned, this item is already completed. They did complete all necessary survey work in that area and got an engineer's estimate of the cost of construction. Again, minus right-of-way acquisition, that's approximately $400,000. So item B, and this has actually changed just slightly from what I gave you, because it did mention the percentage, and there was a concern that it wasn't clear if that percentage meant that their financial commitment could change if the cost of the road happened to become lower or higher. So what we did is just change to say that the owner shall make a payment to the City of Lebanon in an amount equal to $75,000, representing owner's portion of the engineer's estimate of the cost of construction. Payment made in full at a time of approval of the secondary plat and provided and deposited to the clerk treasurer. And that outlines the commitments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
$75,000, that ratio, 75,000 to 400, so if we found the road was 600, are we working that ratio to make that up, or is it 75 is the total amount?
75 is the commitment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Assuming that there's an HOA here?
Yes.
Okay. Questions for Ben?
What cost-wise would you estimate, just roughly, as far as the right-of-way? I mean, do we have any thoughts or?
I don't off the top of my head. This again is a scenario where the properties, their deeds go to the center line of the road. So we're not just asking for an additional 5 feet. We're trying to acquire that total 25-foot half from them. I don't know that we're talking about a significant amount. Kevin, I don't know if you have some thoughts. I can't remember the length of the road.
Yeah, I want to say it's less than a half an acre of total acquisition we would have to do. So it's not an extreme amount of property acquisition, but it's property acquisition, and I think there are 3 separate homeowners plus the church that we would need to approach. And we have not done that yet, so we don't have a temperature of the group to understand if they would be willing to dedicate, willing to sell, as I said, what the temperature of their willingness to participate. But we would like to pursue that, and assuming the project moves forward, the city will. As Ben said earlier, it's not something we would feel compelled to do immediately, because this is probably a 5-year plus build out on the project, and there wouldn't be a full impact to the streets until that time. So we got some time to put this together, not to mention there'll be some significant damage to the road due to we're assuming significant damage to the road as part of the construction process.
So that would be done once everything is done, as far as the acquisition and everything?
Well, we'd probably start the acquisition right away, but in terms of, putting funding together to do the road improvements, we would probably wait till near the end of construction.
Sure.
Now, that is not saying that we would do nothing to repair damage to the road throughout the process. We're going to make sure the road infrastructure is kept in a good state.
Okay, thank you.
On the topic of Riley Road, I'm very happy that was included, the widening of the road, adding the sidewalks, the curbs, the drains. I think it's needed. Was that on the city's radar to update that? I know we have the existing neighborhood to the south of the proposed neighborhood. I don't know what the traffic was like coming out there, but I know it's warranted now with the 80-plus homes. Was that something that, because I guess the $325,000 for the city to invest, plus the potential right-of-way acquisition, that's a pretty big chunk for the city to take on. And I'm just wondering if Riley Road, if that was...
It was not something per se that was on a radar of any kind of capital improvement plan that needed to be done imminently. I will say, we have a capital asset management plan that looks at all of our pavements, looks at the life cycle of those pavements and when they'll need to be resurfaced. We also have an asset plan related to sidewalks, so that area is flagged on our sidewalk plan as an area that doesn't have right-of-way, doesn't have sidewalks. But the problem is there is no right-of-way. We couldn't go there today and start widening the road. We couldn't go there today and start building sidewalks. Unfortunately, Riley Road is effectively, it's essentially an old county road cross-section, and it's sort of been developed around over the years, and not much has been needed there. There's not significant traffic volumes on Riley Road today. I have the numbers in my office. I did not bring them with me. I want to say it's like 250 cars a day. I could be off by a little bit there. In terms of how much traffic, and maybe I'm giving you more information than you need, but how much traffic the Riley Ridge subdivision will generate, if we look at ITE trip generation, and back up, ITE is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and they develop criteria for how you forecast traffic volume increases, and that's what trip generation refers to. You would typically see about 1 vehicle per house in the morning peak travel time. So between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., when most people are leaving for work, you'd see about 1 additional trip during that time per house. So you can kind of go both ways out of this subdivision. So it's hard to say exactly, specifically how people will leave it. If you assume half will go south, half of 85, you're talking 43 cars that are going to go out onto Riley Road, onto Sam Ralston Road. That's not a significant increase to say we might be going from 250 to 290. The intersection was already upgraded when Sam Ralston was reconstructed, so there's plenty of capacity there. So I just don't see that you would witness any real significant loss in level of service on the road. it's something we're aware of. It's only about 20 foot of pavement. We would prefer it to be, at least 22. We'd prefer 24. So we would like to widen it at some point in the future. But obviously, given the fact there's no right-of-way, it just bodes for a very difficult proposition other than resurfacing. And I believe it was resurfaced 2 years ago.
Cool. Thank you.
Then I had one other question of clarification for myself. You talked about the mature trees or the stands of mature trees in certain areas, and nothing else is going to be added there. They're trying to protect those trees. And you said something about fences, and I'm sorry I didn't fully catch it. They're not going to put a fence in there, but homeowners could put fences in there. They're not restricted?
Homeowners could not. That would actually limit. And actually, in some of those cases, there's also an easement that runs through there that limits the ability to put up a fence.
Okay.
So what they're doing is looking at putting up a fence just along that property line on the southeast corner adjacent to the existing property owner. So there would be limitations to putting up fences on those properties. They've got, some of those properties are actually very, very deep. So they've got, a 20-foot tree preservation area or 20 or 25-foot easement, and then still a fairly significant backyard outside of that.
All right. Other questions for Ben?
That tree preservation area, is that on the new development's property, or is that the existing homeowner, or is that within the easement?
That's on the new development's property.
On the new development property, okay.
Yes.
Okay, with no other questions for Ben, can we hear from the applicant?
Good evening. Paul Munoz with Arbor Homes. We did have a chance to meet with Mr. Hunt right before the last town council meeting, and that's kind of the reason why the discussion with him and the fence along that property easement right there, existing property on Riley Road, was not in the plans, is because it was the same day that we had actually submitted these final plans to the Plan Commission. So we did come to an agreement that we were going to go through and look once we had a chance to stake that and remove any of the trees that would be within the area of the fence, and then install a fence along that property line for Mr. Hunt. We also did talk with Mr. Lasley and Mrs. Endicott, which back up to the pond on Common Area 2, and had a discussion with them, and both agreed that because of the pond being there and the difference in the use in those properties, that we felt it was a good mix. There's no standing trees there, and there's no preservation area there to separate between both of those, and thought it made sense to accommodate them by installing a fence in that area too. So we kind of feel that because of the like and similar houses within Clear Vista, and this pretty much being an extension of what was probably going to be a proposed second section to that subdivision, that the similar uses made sense to just be able to separate both of those with that tree preservation area. And that seemed to be of interest to those homeowners also, trying to keep those mature, taller trees in that preservation area. So felt it was a good common mix for both. So feel free to answer any questions you may have.
I have a question on the fences. Who's going to maintain those fences when they need to be repaired?
That'll
Your
be,
HOA or the homeowners?
That would be the HOA, because they are ours and our property.
Okay.
Or I should say the HOA's property, excuse me.
Right. Right.
Other questions for the applicant?
I don't have any questions. Just want to thank you for working with the three like you did. I think that was, really nice to do that.
Thank you.
On the topic of the HOA, is that third-party managed like our previous applicant, or is that done in-house?
It's third-party managed.
Okay.
We have several different firms that do our management of our HOAs for us.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, this is I'd like to open up the public hearing portion of the meeting for anyone that wishes to make a comment about this docket item, 18-9, or I'm sorry, 18-2. Again, if you're here to make comments, if you would sign in before you step to the podium. And then when you step to the podium, if you would give us your name and address, and we will continue with a 3-minute limit on comments. We thank you.
My name's Chuck Hunt. I live on Riley Road. 2 or 3 things. One, Ben, you talked about widening the road to 24 foot on Riley Road. Why is it 24 foot when you're requiring 34 foot in the subdivision?
Because there's no parking allowed on this road.
That's the difference. It's just no parking. Okay. Well, that answers that. The other thing, I lost track here. The other thing I had a question about was, Kevin, you mentioned, it'll come to me. I'm slow and I'm getting older. A lot older some days. Something you mentioned, it had 20 in it. I'm lost. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right. Was it something about traffic generated by the project, or?
It could have been, but I don't think so.
Oh, 20 foot was the width of the existing pavement.
No, that's what, no, what I'm now remember, it's come back to me. You mentioned that there would be 4 property owners involved in the widening as far as buying the acquisition of right-of-way, right?
Yeah, I believe it's 4. You
Three
probably,
residential in the church, right?
That's what I thought, I remembered from memory. And we were assuming we would buy right-of-way off the north side only. The houses on the south side of the road are a lot closer to the road, so we thought it'd be less impact to the overall area, the overall neighborhood, to put the additional pavement widening and the sidewalk on the north side of the road.
Isn't it normally done center to center?
It normally is. Normally,
is there a reason they're going to take more off mine and not off my neighbors?
You know, I can't even guarantee that that's what we would do. That would be my recommendation, as I said, just because the houses are closer on the south side, significantly closer.
Sure.
I'm sure you're aware of that. So it just seemed to be less impactful to the whole area to do it to the north. But to be honest, you're right. Typically, we would widen to both sides of the center line.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, Paul, thank you for meeting with me. Appreciate it.
Mike Lassley. I live on 1712 Lafayette. Met with Paul. Great guy. We got an arrangement of, was it a foot onto your property that the fence line would be?
Yes, I think, we kind of talked about that. I think, Ben, it's 3 feet unless you get permission from the existing homeowners. Is that correct?
It's 3 feet.
Our existing requirements in terms of fences is that the fence would need to be set 3 feet off of the property line unless there's some sort of agreement in place with the adjacent property owner to either put it closer or on the property line. That's typically because most of our residents coming in aren't going to pay a few $1,000s for a survey to exactly locate their property line, so we want to just, for a little bit of a percentage of error, keep it off the property line unless there's an agreement in place.
And just a quick thing to speak to that, one of the reasons why we probably look at taking it off of our property line a little bit is there are 1 or 2 rather large trees that are right about at that property line. They're quite a bit taller and they don't offer a lot of blocking in between, but we want to try to preserve those and not get into the root system. So like Mr. Lasley said, be just a little bit off of our property line.
Onto yours, okay.
So they basically agreed to build the same type of fence that's on Clear Vista. And where our property line stops, where the pond will be, there's an adjacent fence line that's in a wooded area. And you'll basically run up to that fence line and that's where it'll stop.
That is correct.
And that will be built when the pond is done, or?
So all of the fences that we will be putting in will be done once all of the land work is finished. All of the development is in place. Probably about the same time that we start building homes, we make sure that those are in. That way, we don't disturb those whenever we're moving dirt or trying to get in there to get things leveled out and doesn't have any impact at that time. So once earthwork is finished and we're done with all of that, those fences will go in.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Who's responsible for keeping the street clean during construction, as far as mud, debris, and?
The developer would be.
I mean, is that something we're going to try to do daily? I mean, because it's low down that one area. I can tell you right to where they're going to be coming in. It is low. Water will stand for,
The
2 or 3
ordinances in place would require, it's more of an as-needed, so they're required to file and keep, keep weekly inspection logs of all their erosion control practices. And so with that, if there's any deficiency, any mud in the street, any silt fence that is down, any other of the erosion control measures that are required, if there's any deficiency found in those, they would have to be corrected immediately.
And who do we contact? You?
So I gave you my card?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Or feel free to contact your city engineer's office as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Not seeing any others coming forward, I will close the public hearing portion of the meeting and refer back to the council for questions for Ben or the applicant. Barring additional questions from us, the commission, looking for a motion for docket 18-2.
I motion that we propose or approve 18-2 for the Riley Ridge subdivision, pending the applicant adequately addresses attack comments, the applicant receives the formal drainage from stormwater, and the written commitments, the statement of commitments are adhered to.
We have a motion
I'll second.
and a second. Kelly, would you take?
Matt Reynolds,
Yes.
JohnLassley,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik,
Yes.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Jeremy Lawler,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
All right, motion is approved. Great, thank you. Moving on to docket number 18-9, Starlight Leasing, Inc. Development plan. Ben, you want to pick it up from there?
Thank you, Mr. Perry. This is a development plan approval for a contractor's office in the storage yard located at 3701 South Indianapolis Road. The property is approximately 13.3 acres. It is zoned single-family residential and also within the interstate and thoroughfare overlay districts. So just to give you a quick, brief history of this property, as I mentioned just a moment ago, this is located in single-family residential zoning classification. When this property was annexed about 7 or 8 years ago, the ordinance suggests if there are no concept plans for the area at the time that we would annex that property in our least restrictive single-family residential zoning classification or the SF district, which is what is currently zoned. The property has, for the last 10 years at least in our comprehensive plan, been master plan, long-range plan for a mix of commercial and industrial uses. So what we looked at is we looked at just the development of this single piece of property rather than doing a wholesale rezone of the area, knowing that we are getting ready to update our comprehensive plan also. We looked at just doing a use variance for this property specifically and for this use specifically. So they were just at the Board of Zoning Appeals earlier this month. They received a approval for variance of use to permit a contractor's office and warehouse storage facility within that single-family zoning district, and then also received 4 variance approvals. The first was to permit outdoor storage. They do have an outdoor storage yard that is entirely paved with either asphalt or concrete, and it is screened with a 14-foot high wall. They also have a loading berth, or an overhead door, I guess, that faces out on Indianapolis Road, which is not permitted in the overlay. They did receive a variance to allow that, for them to be able to pull equipment into their building and service it, and that's the easiest way to get in and out of the building without having to make about a 20-point turn with a large semi-tractor trailer. The third variance request was for drive width. They do have kind of a shared drive cut that allows access to their storage yard and also access to that overhead door that's a little bit wider to accommodate those larger vehicles that will need to make that turn. And then the last one is fence height. So I mentioned that they're going to have a 14-foot tall wall surrounding that outdoor storage yard. Most of the equipment that they will have in that yard is less than 14 feet tall, so they wanted to be able to adequately screen that area. And our ordinance only permits an 8-foot tall fence as a maximum, so they did get approved for a 14-foot tall fence. And just as, you know, the fence material is going to look roughly like the sound barriers along the interstate. They are, it's a plastic composite material, but it looks like a stone wall in essence. So it's very similar to those materials you see along the interstate. And all of these variants were approved subject to these following conditions: that the applicant provide a landscape plan that meets all applicable buffer, parking, building-based landscape, and site standards prior to the development plan review by the Plan Commission, which they have done. That the applicant installs a sound buffer material within the 14-foot tall screening wall proposed around the perimeter of the outdoor storage yard. As I suggested, this is actually a hollow wall, and the walls can be made with sound buffering material in the wall. Just with some concerns about noise, they were asked and required as part of their approval to put that sound buffering material in the wall. And the final one is there was some concern about commercial vehicles being parked outside of that storage yard, so there was a condition that the applicant limit parking of commercial vehicles to the fully screened outdoor storage yard. Only personal passenger vehicles will be permitted outside the storage yard and or in the parking lot to the south of the building. So those were the variance standards that were approved. Now to kind of walk through our procedural process again, any commercial industrial development is required to come to the Plan Commission for development plan approval. We're in essence looking at each project to make sure that it does meet all of the standards of our ordinance, in addition to meeting the conditions of their approvals from the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that's what we're doing tonight. This is their landscape plan. This gives you an idea of the overall site. It's an odd-shaped site. This is actually turned to the side, so north is actually generally to the left. This angled property, a piece of the property here to the south is Interstate 65, and then this longer frontage is on Indianapolis Road. So this is an approximately, I believe it's about 20,000 square foot facility. I've got it in here somewhere. And it does include a 2-story office component to the south, and then a large warehouse for repairs and maintenance to the north. And then what you see here in kind of this darker gray and white color is their storage yard, which again is either asphalt or concrete, depending on the area. And then the wall would entirely surround this storage yard all the way around the storage yard, completely enclosing that area. All of their employee parking is around and to the south of the building in this area. And as you see here, as I mentioned, they had to meet our landscape standards, and this property is kind of they have to meet a significant amount of standards here because, one, they're adjacent to residential uses or residentially zoned property, which requires additional buffers. They're also in the thoroughfare and interstate overlay district that requires buffers as well. And then they have parking lot perimeter, interior, and building-based landscaping. So what you see here is a very significant landscape plan, but it does meet our requirements. You've got the street, they meet the street tree requirements. You see the commercial street buffer requirement along the frontage. They do have a mound and landscaping that is along the frontage of the storage yard. So you got a significant mound and landscaping in addition to the wall. Here you see their building-based landscaping all the way around at least 75% of the building. They do meet their parking lot perimeter landscaping requirement and interior requirements, and then the additional buffer, like I mentioned, that's required along the interstate. This area you see here that's kind of to the northeast or to the north side, there is an existing significant stand of trees in this area. So they did supplement in a few locations, but for the most part, the existing tree stand is the landscaping. So, and again, this is where it's adjacent to the interstate, thus the landscaping you see here, both along the property border and around the detention areas. Walking through some of the TAC comments, and I think the main TAC comment that you'll see that we're still negotiating and working on is water and sewer infrastructure to this property. And again, I'll default to Kevin a little bit if there's any updates, but we are working through a number of different scenarios to provide utilities to this property. We would not permit them to pull a building permit until we've got that solution figured out, or we're well on our way to doing that. So we don't want to get in a scenario where we're permitting a construction to start without that solution figured out. We absolutely do not want a piece of property on well and septic. This needs to be on public utilities. So while we don't have the solution right now, we are working on that, and one of the conditions of approval is that solution will have been determined at the time that, or prior to the time that a building permit is pulled. In terms of stormwater, they are working their way through review with Kerry Daly and Christopher Burke. I believe they are very close to receiving that approval. In terms of city engineer requirements, they're fairly substantial, but most of them are small details related to their drawings. The one main component that you will see is that they were asked to dedicate right-of-way along Indianapolis Road. I believe the existing right-of-way is more significant than what we require in our thoroughfare plan, so there is sufficient right-of-way to meet our standard. And they were also asked to place a concrete sidewalk within the right-of-way along the entire frontage on Indianapolis Road, and they have shown that on their plans. I think those are the main components. Like I said, the major component yet is the public water and wastewater facilities we're still working on. In terms of planning review, they have met all of our planning requirements. They meet our parking requirement. In fact, they have additional parking beyond what's required. Lighting is just, they have some building lighting. There is no parking lot lighting that's proposed, so the lighting will not have any sort of impact on the surrounding neighbors. In fact, there isn't even a foot candle measurement at the property lines based on their projections. Landscaping, as I mentioned, I already kind of walked through that. It's fairly significant. In terms of signage, they do have wall signs on the building, but no other signage has been proposed, and it does meet our requirements. Architectural review, I will pull up those elevations. I know the applicant has them as well. This represents a good example of what the building will look like. The three main materials are split-face concrete block, architectural metal, and then it's a poured concrete panel that you see over this entryway. They obviously work in concrete, so it's something that they can do for part of this building. So what you see here in kind of this lighter color gray here is the architectural metal. This darker gray would be the concrete block, and then what you see in these two locations would be those concrete panels. Those elements do meet our standards of the Thoroughfare Overlay District, so they have met all the architectural requirements. So moving on to staff recommendation and review of the submitted development plan, staff finds compliance with the UDO and the requirements of their variance and use variance approvals. We recommend approval of the subject development plan contingent on the following conditions. Number one, that the applicant adequately address any remaining City of Lebanon TAC comments prior to application for any building permits or site improvements, and I believe they've actually addressed all those already. But just in case there's anything outstanding, we want to make sure those all get taken care of. And number two, and most importantly, the water, wastewater utilities, that the applicant coordinate with City of Lebanon Utilities to finalize water, wastewater infrastructure and appropriate design elements on construction drawings prior to application for any building permits or site improvements. And again, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ben. Questions for Ben?
And if I'm looking at the property correctly, it appears to be bordered by 3 residential structures. Is that correct? To the north, south, and to the west?
Yes, yes. There are 3. There's a handful of them, but directly adjacent there are 3 homes, and then you've got some additional homes that go in either direction on Indianapolis Road, and then also a scattering of non-residential uses as well.
And this may be a better question for the applicant, but have conversations been had with those connecting landowners, those residences, to see what their input is?
Yes, we had discussions at the Board of Zoning Appeals as part of the use variance and variance approvals. The main remonstrance was that they just didn't want it there. If it was going to be there, make sure it meets as many standards as possible, which they have done. But we certainly have had some significant discussion with some of the adjacent property owners, at least the ones that chose to show up at the public hearings of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Understood. Thank you.
A couple of things for you, Ben. You talk about the land as it was annexed to the city.
Yes.
It defaults to SF1, right?
Yes.
That's the default.
Yes.
And that's what we've had it as annexed property into the city.
Correct.
The comprehensive plan, of which we're getting ready to revise, or you stated we're getting ready to revise, well, does that change the zoning of that?
It does not. The comprehensive plan is just an advisory document, so we would still, if we were going to choose to rezone properties according to the comprehensive plan recommendations, we would have to actively pursue a rezone of those properties through the Planning Commission and Council.
Okay. And then probably more directed toward the site plan, you talk about the landscaping along Indianapolis Avenue, and the plan shows a significant amount of landscape material being placed in along Indianapolis Avenue, and then you also talked about a mound, which I guess is pretty standard, I get, for along a thoroughfare like Indianapolis Avenue.
So in terms of the planting that you see here, this is what the ordinance requires. So it would require those street trees, the commercial street buffer, which is what you see just on the other side of the property line, and then the parking lot perimeter and building-based landscaping. So this is what our ordinance requires for this. The applicant proposed this wall, knowing that that's their storage yard. They're trying to screen that as much as possible from the adjacent neighbors. So they have shown a significant wall. Again, that's part of the buffer requirements for an industrial use adjacent to residential uses to look
Okay,
at that.
the landscape mound of which we're talking about there, what's the height of that mound?
4 feet.
4 feet.
Yeah, very between 0 to 4 feet.
Okay. And are there plantings on that mound?
Yes.
So the landscape could end up higher than the wall itself?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Ben? Barring questions for Ben, I guess we'll hear from the applicant, please.
Oh, you're not. Okay.
Good evening, my name is Brian Munch. I'm with Munch Engineering, representing Weber Concrete. Ben did a great job presenting the petition to you tonight. I want to add a couple things that Ben skipped over. First of all, Weber Concrete's been a long-standing member of the Lebanon community since 2002, employs somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 local residents. This is a natural progression of their business growth in the community. Weber Concrete itself is in residential concrete basement construction, if you will, but they do have some ancillary type businesses. They do have a couple concrete companies as well as a leasing company. Those three identities will be corporate headquartered out of this new facility. The new facility does allow them to grow, continue to service the community in the geographical area of Lebanon. One point that I want to add to is the discussions. This is, even though it's the first time being presented to this commission, it has gone through the Board of Zoning Appeals. This has been on the Board of Zoning Appeals from early January. At that meeting, we were able to have a discussion to hear from the neighborhood group. Some of those comments that came out were for people still in the town of Whitestown, but they were adjacent to the new Case excavating dealership. That particular property has outdoor storage. It's a stone lot, and there was a lot of concern with dust. So as an example, we understood that comment, came back and made all our outdoor storage hard surface. Also, we had some parking in the front of the building for employees. Through that discussion, we moved that parking off to the side. So we have listened to some of the residents' concerns, addressed those as best we could in the site plan that's presented today. The other thing that I want to make sure is very clear, Weber Concrete is in business, has been in business in Lebanon since 2002. They have an existing facility just north of this proposed property that basically they got in 2002. Is a single-family residence, had some property associated to it. They started using it as their main office, starting using the adjacent property as outdoor storage. One of the commitments we made to the BZA was 45 days after a certificate of occupancy being issued for our new building, we will clean up that existing yard to the satisfaction of the planning department, as well as there's an old residential house just to the south of their main office that we will raise and tear down and clean up that property. So we have made that commitment in moving forward. We do want to be a good community member, and we do want to clean up the facility that we currently are operating. It just, unfortunately, we have outgrown that property, and that growth has caused us to have inefficiencies and things stored upon things in that yard. This property gives us the opportunity to start fresh, to screen our outdoor storage, clean up our old mess, and move forward as a good community member. Lastly, real quickly about drainage. We have been through the Boone County Drainage Board. There is a legal drain through the property as well as an existing field tile system through the property. We have received approval from the Boone County Drainage Board. We're currently working with Kevin, his department, and Kerry Daly. We received comments this morning from Kerry Daly. They're very minor in nature, graphical type items, drawing cleanup. So our drainage concept is very sound. It's been through the Boone County Drainage Board. We have provided proper storage, excessive storage on property, as well as worked with the Boone County Surveyor to maintain the legal drainage system through the property itself by their granting us of that approval.
Is Weber going to stay at the facility they're at now, or are they going to use any of that facility, or is that facility going to be gone?
No, they will maintain that facility. There is a maintenance garage on that facility due to the fleet of trucks that they have, as well as the storage of some of their additional forms. They will have a presence there. The office personnel will move down. And I'm not hiding anything. If you drive by the facility anytime during the day, you'll see cars parked haphazard along Indianapolis Road. This project takes care of that problem. That yard will be maintained, but it will be behind the fenced area.
I have a question then.
Yes, sir.
I thought I heard you say you had to clean that property up within 45 days. Now I'm hearing you say you're still going to use it?
We're going to clean it up. We're not going to vacate it. We're going to clean it up to the approval of planning department to make sure that it is.
And then will you maintain it that same way then?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Other questions? I do have one question, and I'm sure that you or Kevin can answer it. Initially, when this was brought forward with the gravel lots and such for storage, there were drainage calculations done. Mm-hmm. Now that it's all impervious surface, have those all been re-looked at?
Yep. All that has been taken into account. And Brian's right. I looked at the comments from Kerry Daly this morning. They are really minor housekeeping issues. Correct. The drainage concept, the storage concept, the stormwater treatment concepts, that is all sound and been approved.
Yeah, and if I may, if you have the site plan pulled in front of you, you can see to the east of the property a very significant retention basin that provides stormwater quality as well as retention storage prior to this watershed draining underneath Interstate 65. So all the areas to the rear of the property, if you stand on the end of this road, is for stormwater management. And that meets or exceeds current Boone County ordinance as well as city ordinances when it comes to drainage.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for the applicant? Barring none. This is a public hearing, and I will open up the public hearing portion of this meeting for those that wish to comment on this docket item. Again, if you're going to speak, if you would sign in, and then you come to the podium, state your name and your address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm Gary Hayes. I live at 3720 Indianapolis Road. I'd like to clarify, the road I live on is Indianapolis Road, not Indianapolis Avenue. I've heard that confused so many times. Those of us that live down there are sensitive about it. Indianapolis Avenue's up in Lebanon. Okay. Right. Yeah, I have 3 acres right across the street from this facility, this proposed facility. I've been there 35 years. And I'm just going to be just directly across from the building. Right between the 2 driveways is my home. And yes, I am very disappointed that Lebanon has considered allowing this to be done in this area that's been zoned residential for the last 10 years. And but the main reason I came up here tonight, I wanted something that it hasn't been addressed tonight, but it was a comment that Mr. Munch made at the BZA where he said that that they were considering asking to have an extra lane put in on their side of Indianapolis Road, I think between their 2 drives, and he didn't address that tonight, so I don't know if that's still in the plans, but I would like to say a couple things about that. If that does come before you as a proposal, I have a lot of problems now with Weber trucks and other trucks turning around in my driveways. Sometimes they back in, other times they just make U-turns. And Indianapolis Road there it's 3 lanes wide. It's a 3-lane thoroughfare since Old 52 once was 3 lanes. Now it's just 2 lanes with bicycle paths down each side, delineated as bicycle paths. when vehicles try to turn around and make U-turns, they invariably get into the shoulders, cause me a lot of, I had to make a lot of repairs on the shoulders of the road. And I feel like if that extra lane was allowed, it would just encourage people to make those U-turns, making the road look wide enough when it's not really for straight trucks to turn. And I'm also afraid that vehicles would park on that strip if it's allowed, because this facility as proposed doesn't really have a good place for vehicles to turn around and go back out on the road. And I'm afraid that vehicles would just stop directly in front of my house on this extra lane. So if that happens to be proposed, I think that should be considered quite carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want, Mr. Munt? Anyone else? I'm sorry. Barring anyone else having comments, I will close the public hearing portion of the meeting. Ben, if you want to.
Sure, I will address that, and I apologize I didn't already. This was one of the TAC comments from the city engineer based on the thoroughfare plan improvements for Indianapolis Road in this area. So it does require widening to accommodate two 12-foot width northbound lanes across the property frontage. And that additional lane would be striped as a acceleration deceleration taper lane for their property, so that we still have the ability for through traffic, and then also the ability for people to pull off onto those decel XL tapers as they're entering and exiting the property. So I think that is what this gentleman was referring to. In terms of people parking on there, it wouldn't be permitted. It would just as easily as sending somebody from the police department or our code enforcement down to tag the vehicle. They're not permitted to park in the right-of-way like that. So we can address that through code enforcement or from the police department. And as far as folks doing U-turns, I guess they're not permitted, but we can't stop it if there's nobody out there to stop them. But in terms of what was required, that was required from the city engineer to install that additional lane to accommodate XL decel tapers so that you were not impacting the through traffic along Indianapolis Road.
That addition, Ben, or that third lane was specifically for this development, for the traffic in and out?
So the ultimate design for Indianapolis Road at build out would be an additional, it would be 2 through lanes on Indianapolis Road. We don't need 2 through lanes northbound now. So what we're asking them to do is essentially to install that through lane, but then right now use it for XL decel tapers for their property. But the long-term plan via our thoroughfare plan for this road is to have two lanes in either direction. So we're asking them to install that now as part of this project.
Okay. Other questions for Ben?
We also just reminded, the city engineer did also ask for some turning movement diagrams to show how various truck lengths will get in and out of that property to make sure that they're not going to be driving through turf or impacting neighbors' yards, et cetera. So they have provided those for any and all trucks lengths that would be using the property, and it shows that the trucks can make those turns at the drives without impacting turf on adjacent properties. It would all be on pavement, so they have been able to show that as well.
Okay. One last time for questions for Ben. All right, barring any other questions, looking for a motion for docket 18-9.
I'm making a motion to approve docket 18-9, contingent upon meeting the requirements associated with the TAC comments and coordination with the water and wastewater utilities to provide service to the location.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly, will you take the roll?
Matt Reynolds,
Yes.
John Lastly,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik,
Yes.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Jeremy Lawler,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right, on to our last item, docket number 1811. Consideration for initial zoning classification for a voluntary annexation request. Ben, you want to carry us through this?
Sure. I'll walk you through a little bit on the process here. We did receive a petition for annexation for this property. The applicant is legally described as TTS Real Estate. This is actually the real estate holding company for Festool, which has a facility currently to the east. They are evaluating a number of different expansion opportunities of their property and looked at the possibilities of being able to expand to the east on this property. So they have filed a voluntary petition for annexation for this property. The process would involve first a hearing at the Plan Commission for a zoning recommendation. So similar to what we were just talking about before, in this case, we do have a concept plan for an expansion for Festool on this property that would show additional industrial, office, warehouse, manufacturing uses on the property, and I'll show you that here in a second. But just to go, as far as the process, once you guys provide a recommendation on the zoning, then this would move forward with the annexation ordinance to the council at their next meeting. Along with your recommendation for zoning. So in terms of the property, this gives you a little bit of idea what we're talking about. Festool's existing facility is right here. This is State Road 32 and what is the road? 200, I believe, 200 West. That's just due west of the existing business park. This is about a 23-acre site, if my memory serves me correctly, but a little over 23 acres. The property is currently within the county zoning district, and it is zoned a light industrial zoning classification. Our comprehensive plan also recommends industrial uses for this property, and the applicant is proposing an industrial use for the property. So we're kind of in alignment to provide a recommendation for a zoning classification of a light industrial use, which in our case is the PBI zoning district. So that is the dimensions of the property. I'll show the expansion proposal. This is a concept plan. So again, you see in white here, this is their existing warehousing distribution facility, their existing office, about 20,000 square feet. And this shows us a multi-phase expansion of this property. In light blue here is an expansion of the office component. This light blue, this I guess darker blue would represent a phase one expansion of the manufacturing warehousing portion of the property. And then what you see here is future expansion of warehousing, distribution, and office in future phases. So this provides them a significant opportunity for growth. I believe this proposed expansion of the warehouse is about 140,000 square feet, and then they were showing an additional 20,000 square feet of office in this phase one expansion. So just walking through again, the property is currently zoned through the county as an industrial zoning classification. Our comprehensive plan recommends an industrial uses for the property. They are proposing uses that would be permitted by our PBI zoning district. Our planned business industrial light is kind of our light industrial zoning classification. And so staff has recommended that the Plan Commission recommend the planned business industrial PBI zoning classification to the Common Council for the proposed annexed territory. I'll just also quick throw up. They've also, as part of their concept, already have developed some proposed elevations. I know for those that are already familiar with the Festool facility, this kind of continues that same design concept. This is part of their existing building, so they're maintaining that same architectural design, which is a higher architectural design than what you typically see for a warehouse facility, and then this would represent the office expansion that you see here as part of this. So they are planning a very nice looking facility as part of this conceptual expansion that we're showing. So I would be happy to answer any questions you have about this or about the process, and the applicant is also here to fill in some of the details that I may have missed.
Thanks, Ben. Are we recommending the rezoning classification pending the annexation, or is our rezoning what's going to allow the annexation?
So this is just a recommendation from the Planning Commission for a zoning district to establish, the council would actually make the annexation and establish the zoning. This is just a Planning Commission recommendation to the council. So you would recommend the council would adopt the annexation and the new zoning district as part of their ordinance process.
Okay.
Other questions for Ben? Hear from the applicant?
Sure.
Brought a little show and tell to end the evening tonight. You might notice that it does say Festool on there, so I'm glad that we cleared up who the petitioner actually is. The TTS Real Estate is an entity of Festool. So I serve as general counsel for Festool as well as the related entities. And I'm wearing, well, first of all, just to give you the address of the 23-acre proposed site is 345 North, 200 West in Lebanon that Ben pointed out. And I'm wearing a couple hats tonight because Brian Goldthorpe, who is the president of Festool, wanted to be here tonight, sends his apologies, but he's traveling this week. So with that being said, I just want to give you a little bit of background. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Festool. They've been in the community for about 10 or 11 years. They've already expanded at their current site. Some of the elevation that Ben showed you is glass, wood. They've shipped in beams from out of state in order to maintain a higher architectural standard on all of their buildings, which would make sense since they're into woodworking and producing power tools. But they are a high-end power tool manufacturer. So this is actually a two-part crop. One is the plunge saw itself. I don't know do any of you do woodworking at all? So they're branded with, of course, the green Festool, but this is a plunge saw that has a track that aligns with it to do extensive wood cutting. I think it's got the longest cut ratio of anything on the market. All of their tools have a capacity for a dust extractor, so that when you're working at home or on the site, you can easily evacuate the dust. So at their current facility here, this is the North American headquarters for Festool. So they not only distribute it in the U.S., but also into Canada as well. And they're currently up to about $150 million in sales from this site out here at the current business park on 32. So I'm able to announce tonight, actually for the first time, that they've acquired a couple of new companies. One is an entity called SawStop, which if you go on and you YouTube SawStop, it's actual technology that recognizes organic material in a saw blade. It immediately retracts and stops from injuring individuals, which I think currently it's like 30,000 saw injuries a year or something like that. So they've now brought that under their umbrella. They've also acquired, and they're on the West Coast, I think in the Portland area. The other company is called Tanos, and they actually make these plastic containers. These are called sustainers. So all Festool products come in a sustainer. They figured out how to latch it easily, but they brought that in as well, so that it fits with their product. They've been manufacturing for Festool for a number of years, but Germany has brought them in as well. And that's important, I think, here and going forward on the annexation, because they're looking at moving both of those headquarters here, just the office headquarters, not the manufacturing portion. So there's a significant, and this goes into our phase 2. I think you've seen the phase 1 is obviously the most important at this time, which is going to add some warehouse space, and they're going to do some light assembly work. So they could be putting together these saws, but they're not actually going to be manufacturing in the traditional sense, although I think it would be permitted where it's currently zoned. But bringing those in, phase 1 I think will add initially about 40 new jobs, and those pay anywhere from $17 an hour up to $60,000 a year. There's currently, I think, 74 employees at the current location. So I can go in, if you want to, in some of the considerations as far as how you're going to classify this, but as Mr. Perry indicated earlier, that with our annexation petition, the default zoning is the single family, and we're asking actually to downzone it somewhat into the PBI. It's currently, as Ben said, the light manufacturing in this entire area. So with that being said, we're just asking you to make that recommendation. I think we appear before the Common Council next Monday on the annexation. We're currently obviously in the business park, so this property is right behind us and is just outside the city limits. But it all seems to be within the general plan.
Great. Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Barring questions, I will open up the public hearing portion of the meeting for anyone that wishes to make a comment. We're not having stampede. I will close the public hearing portion of the meeting. Again, ask for questions for Ben or the applicant.
What is the time span, do you think, as far as the expansion, or is there any?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I forgot to tell you that the phase one, we're actually looking to try to break ground this year still in 2018. That's going to be 16,000 square foot of office space and about 137,000 square foot of warehouse. It's going to look, Ben, can you help pull that elevation on it? So as Ben pointed out, and it should say warehouse, not warehouseway, so I'm not sure how that got on there. But on the top frame there, as you're looking to your left, that's Enterprise Boulevard. So that's looking at the side-facing elevation of the office space. The two in the middle are current warehouse space. Phase one would then be the third one to the right, and then it's going to go behind that. So it's going to be as an L orientation from Enterprise Boulevard. And then you can see from the south coming up Enterprise Boulevard that the existing office space will wrap around and utilize that same development concept. As far as phase two, that's a couple years out. Depends on sales and how things go, but I don't think phase two will happen within the next 3 to 5 years, probably.
Okay, thank you.
But we wanted you to be aware of the entire planned use of that.
I think it's great for the expansion.
Thank you.
Will they be transferring any of those people this year in the new office space?
I don't think they'll have it done by the end of the year.
Okay.
But they look to start hiring by the first of the year and have some of those positions filled.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, answer my geography question here, Ben. This is adjacent to the business park, right?
Yes, yeah, the
It's in
existing
the
business park
it's in the-
limits are just east of this property.
Yeah.
Property just west of them.
So this it's not technically an expansion of the business park then?
No, this would not be a Duke Realty property. This would just be a planned business industrial zone piece of property. They would actually they would have to redeed or replat this property, combine the two together to allow the expansion, so that there's not a property line in between the two. But the business park is primarily managed by Duke Realty. This would not be. So it wouldn't technically be business park property, but it would be a component of Festool's property and expansion.
And any effect on the adjacent land to the north? There, in the picture you provided, there was several houses there.
Yeah, there are houses there. All those houses right now are zoned in a light manufacturing, light industrial zoning classification also within the county's limits. So this isn't really necessarily changing the zoning that's already there through the county's zoning area plan commission. But in terms of providing landscaping, et cetera. I mean, you can see already that the architecture of their building is significantly higher than a typical warehouse facility. And as a European company, they're very cognizant of landscape requirements and would do the same to make sure that they're being good neighbors to those property owners. But that would come at a development plan review through this board as well at the appropriate time.
There's enough space for all the truck movement?
Yes.
Kind of things?
According to the concept, yes, but we'll definitely get into the more details of that once we get to the development plan phase.
Okay. Other questions for Ben or the applicant? Barring none, I'm looking for a motion to...
I'll make a motion to recommend planned business industrial zoning classification to the Common Council for the proposed annexed territory.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly?
Matt Reynolds,
Yes.
John Lastly,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik,
Yes.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Jeremy Lawler,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Any other business for the commission tonight? Looking for one last motion then to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Second. We thank you for this evening's time.
They're very quick.
Huh?
They're very quick.
Real.
Thanks, Jeremy. Nice sitting next to you. Good luck with your pig. I won't.